So we recorded this on Friday. I believe you're seeing it now on Wednesday. In between that, on Monday morning, it was announced that the RC, the Commander Rules Committee, was passing over ownership and regulation of Commander over to Wizards of the Coast. Now, that is obviously a huge update that would change some of our opinions and statements in this video that you are about to watch. So just keep that in mind as you are watching it. We recorded it before that announcement was made. I will probably do some kind of follow-up video talking about that. Maybe we'll talk about it in part of next week's podcast, something like that. But I thought I should make that statement here because obviously that's a huge update in the story. Yeah. But anyways, hope you enjoy our conversation about these bans from Commander. Hello and welcome back to Geek and Speak, the Geek and Seek podcast. Today, oh boy, we are talking about some of the biggest news that we have got in Commander in a very long time. Very big ban update. But because of the pace at which we do our recording and editing and stuff here at Geek and Seek, we are just now getting to talk about it a week after it happened. Huge bans in Commander. Lots to talk about, lots of differing opinions. I am your host, Morgan, and joined with me is Jason. Jason, how's it going, man?
Going good. Excited for football this weekend, and these bans came out of nowhere. So I have very strong opinions about it. So I've just been trying to focus on football and subvert all the rage.
I hear you, man. I hear you. Okay, so it's so funny. We'll get into this, but it's so funny because I was doing my job, and as I'm working, I get the notification that the ban happens, and me and the guys at MTG Goldfish, because the ban happened while they were recording their podcast, and like just halfway through recording, they were like, "Hey, nice!" Like they were like pretty pumped about it, and I was like, "Yeah, these seem like great bans." And then as I'm sure a lot of you know, people are not happy about it. So very interesting how we were just completely wrong about the community feedback. But we'll get into all that and more in today's video. If you are new, make sure you are subscribed. Do all the other YouTube algorithm stuff, such as liking this video, sharing it with a friend, checking out our other videos. We have I don't even know how many videos at this point, a lot. We've had 60-something episodes of this podcast. We have Commander gameplay. We have other videos. Go check that stuff out. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can head over to patreon.com/geekandseekyoutube. You can also find a link to our Discord in the description of this video if you would like to connect with us and keep the conversation going. All right. We should also maybe start out with something that I feel like in today's day and age shouldn't have to be said. But man, get your crap together, guys. Apparently, I haven't seen a whole lot of this, but apparently there's a lot of threats going around, mostly to people on the RC, but also to members. So that being the rules committee, and then also to the Commander Advisory Group, who, by the way, were kept out of the loop. They didn't know this ban was happening, and then even some vendors have gotten threats. If you are sending threats over a card game, you need to reassess your heart and check yourself. All right. And it's not, I know a lot of this is just frustration out of the quote unquote financial loss of this. But at the end of the day, we are spending a bunch of money on cardboard that costs Wizards of the Coast roughly 5 cents to make, and this is a hobby. It's just a game. It's not worth all of this. And even if you disagree with people, just be nice to people, for crying out loud. As you are about to hear in this here podcast, Jason and I do not agree on this topic. Really, for most of it. I think there's probably individual things that we agree on, but I think overall we don't agree. And that's true in a lot of other parts of our life, all right? But at the end of the day, Jason and I are still friends. We're still going to be nice to each other. We're still going to hear what the other person has to say. And that's how we should just be treating each other in the community. And it's just been very disgruntling. Is that the word? Seeing the... Sure, thanks, man. I've been flabbergasted, man. I've been flabbergasted at some of the crap I've been seeing online. So,
to piggyback off that, I just this is not okay. Even if you don't agree with the bans, I don't agree with certain things. So we'll get into that. But even if you don't agree with them, it's not like you're gonna like be hauled off to jail or banned from buying Magic cards if you and your playgroup decide to still use these cards. Like, it's fine if they're not tournament legal. Like, that's, I don't play in tournaments. I really have no spot to speak on that. I will get to some of the things that are probably making people really angry about this, but there is no reason to threaten someone's life over, rules for a card game. Like, this isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! We're not dueling in, like, shadow duels. Nobody's getting their soul
Shadow
sealed
round,
in the seal of Orichalcos. It's not happening. So, just, it's not that serious. You can be upset and you can voice your opinions online. That's fine. That's what the internet's for. But it doesn't give you the right, and it doesn't excuse any type of threats towards people's lives. That's just... I wish I could talk that level of hatred out of some people, but it's just something that you got to fix yourself. Jewel is very upset with you guys. Stop being mean to people online.
And it just feels like a dumb thing that we even have. Like, it feels so stupid that we have to say this. Like, if you are the kind of person who is going to go online and complain, like, you are theoretically an adult who has responsibilities. So, like, you have some level of functionality, and you should be able to catch yourself and being like, hey, maybe I don't send this tweet, or maybe I don't send this mean email, or maybe I, take 10 seconds to breathe in and out, like, it's just so frustrating. So I feel it's so dumb that we have to spend 5 minutes talking about this. What kind of world is this?
Immediately when I found out, I was upset. I felt a certain type of way about, the whole thing. And I just needed some time to give myself, the ability to think it through and see, like, what perspectives maybe were all tossed around when this was being debated. But even in the moment, you can't fly off the handle like that and start attacking people over a card game. Like, this is, you gotta remember, at the end of the day, these are the little rectangles of paperboard. So
let's head into the specifics. I'm sure at this point everyone's pretty aware we're probably the last YouTube channel getting to it. But this is, so keep in mind, okay, a little bit of context on why this might have shocked people is we went almost 3 years, I think, without a banning. Like, I think it was the Golos ban was the last thing we got banned, and
I think so.
That was a while ago. And, or was the Flash banning since then?
Do you count? Oh God, what was the otter that got banned before it even came out?
Blue Tree. I guess that was probably around the same time.
Would you count that? It was banned before it was even possible to play it. So
I don't know. That'll circle back to later in our conversation, though. I think I have so much to say. I have so much to say, man. But what actually got banned is Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Nadu Winged Wisdom. And I think it's fair to say that we have different levels of feelings about each of these individual cards. And I think part of it is that these are all semi-expensive cards that are semi-popular. And that was a lot of change to happen when we went 3 years without a ban. Like, that I think is specifically what I think is throwing people off so much. But quick recap. Should I go on the Commander website? They actually have like 2-sentence descriptions on why they banned each card. Should I just read those real quick?
Yeah, I have that pulled up. You don't need to read them. I think like having them in front of us is we can use that and go back and forth. We don't just have to spew out the words that other people have written.
Sure. Yeah, you guys can go over to mtgcommander.net. That's the official hub for the Commander Rules Committee. So if you want any kind of, that's a great place to see their full announcements when they do these quarterly updates, as well as if you go over to the banned card section, they have a list of all the cards that are banned and a little drop down where you can read 2 or 3 sentences about why it was banned and when it was banned and all that. So
I want to talk about Nadu and Dockside first, because here is where I think that you and I agree. I'm totally fine with Nadu and Dockside being banned. Nadu is a problem creature. Like, for, the Wizards of the Coast, the Rules Committee, whoever put this actually, who would be responsible for writing this article? It is the Commander Rules Committee. That's yeah. So in the article that the Commander Rules Committee wrote, there's descriptions for why each one was banned. Under Nadu, it could have just said "duh," and yeah, Nadu's broken. I'll just real quick read what it does. It's a flying 3/4 bird wizard for 1 blue, 1 green, and 1. Creatures you control have. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn. So there's just stupid ways to go nuts and combo off infinitely with this. And
yeah.
In the command zone, I guess it's pretty unfair. I always argued that like it being in the command zone was like something that made it weaker in Commander because you could see it coming and so you could prepare for it. But honestly, even if you prepare for it, it's going to be too consistent and it's just going to win way too fast. And other types of decks aren't going to be able to catch up to it. And I think that this is a card that leads to feel bad win or losses, because it's nothing that like wins you the game immediately. You have to take like a 40-minute turn just to get to the win. So that's just not fun. And I don't think that this card promotes fun games. So I'm fine with this being banned.
Yeah, I'd like to just get whatever little bit of a conversation we have about Nadu just out of the way at the beginning really fast, because I think that's the easiest thing. Well, okay, so part of it, people don't have much of an attachment to Nadu because it's a new card. There's no sentimental attachment to it necessarily, and it is a very popular new commander from Modern Horizons, but like it's relatively cheap, especially when it got banned in Modern. But like no one sad to see it go because they knew that this was going to happen. What's funny is that they wrote a whole article about Nadu being a mistake. Like this, they play tested Nadu. It was supposed to be a support piece and like equipment style decks for Modern. They decided it was not good enough to actually make the cut in those decks, so they changed it so that it would be a fun commander. And what ended up happening is not that by doing that they actually did make a broken Modern card. And so this, when they did the Pro Tour, 6 of the top 8 decks were Nadu decks, and I love watching Pro Magic. That was the worst experience ever because it was so awful because Nadu, the problem is it's not only is it pretty easy to combo with Nadu, it's non-deterministic and it's very convoluted loops. So not only like it's wrong to scoop to it. Like when they start comboing off, it's wrong to scoop because they might whiff. And if they don't, you probably still have a turn to find an answer. So you have to sit there for the 20 minutes that they're spinning their wheels and doing their thing. So it ends up getting banned in Modern, and because of the design mistakes, and one of the cards that it combos with is Lightning Greaves, which is a very, very popular Commander card, it was a matter of time before it had to get banned in Commander. I don't think this shocks anyone. I know there's people who are like, oh, but it's just a bird deck, and it's just here in my Commander because it's a bird. I don't care. It's still a messed up Magic card.
Stop lying to yourself.
Fair Nadu is still Nadu. Like you go to Swords It and it still replaces itself. It still either gets you a card or a land. Like
I feel very confident that everyone who's playing Nadu saw this get banned and they were like, yeah, I get it. Like nobody was really that upset unless it's like your first Commander deck ever and you were just super like, oh, but it's mine. Which I doubt was very many people.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, though, you have other options. Like, you can take those cards and just go build a new deck. Unless you literally build... Well, no, even if you build birds, there's other bird commander options. If that's really what you did, so...
100%.
So, I would be happy I'm done talking about Nadu.
Nadu ban, fine. Good with it.
Yeah.
Dockside. So, Dockside's one of those cards that's like... The first time you see it, you're like, oh, man, I really want to play that card. And then the first time you play it, you're like, wow, this is a really strong card. And then the more you play it, you're like, this is... Like, I will win most of the games that I cast this when it, like, is going to make me a lot of mana. If it's going to generate, like, huge amounts of mana in one turn, like, I'm going to be able to win this game. That's going to happen most of the time. It is... I get, like... not wanting to make cards that are just like always going to be auto includes in every deck that has the color. Like I know that that's something that they try to avoid doing. just to make the card designs more interesting and make decks more unique. I understand why this had to be created when it was what it was like when it came out. Red just didn't have a whole lot of ways to keep up in the ramp because it was all ritual type stuff. It was like one time mana that you get and you either use it then or it's gone. So I understand why Red needed it, but just the amount of ways that you could exploit that because it's an ETB trigger. I mean, this is just another one of those things that's going to lead to really, really long turns because people are just looping it over and over again, making all these treasures. It's like it might be infinite, so they make as many treasures as they need, and then they don't need to loop it anymore. But still, you kind of get into the same thing with Nadu, where it just leads to really long turns and feel bad wins. Or losses, excuse me.
Yeah, so Dockside, for those of you who don't know, I believe it's from the Jeskai Spellslinger precon from Commander 2019. For 1 in a red, it's a Goblin Pirate 1/2, but when it enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and or enchantments your opponents control. So the problem is, so we actually knew that this was a possible ban for a long time. For a long time, the Commander Rules Committee has said, hey, this card is really, really pushed. We're going to be keeping an eye on it. Like, they've been saying that for years. So we knew that this was probably going to happen. And for a long time, the reason that they used what they would say to justify not banning it yet is that it's scaled with the power of your table. If you are at a table where people are playing a lot more fast mana and mana rocks and stuff, then Dockside makes more mana more often early in the game. Whereas if you're playing at the more casual level and it takes a little bit later into the game before Dockside's really popping off, then it balances out. The problem is that artifact and enchantment decks have gotten a ton of extra support on the casual level. And so now even at casual tables, Dockside's still a problem, even if you don't have those other cards. And there are combos with it, like specifically it being 2 mana means a lot of basically all reanimation spells can hit it. If it gets killed, it's easy to loop. There's combos if it's with like Temur Sabertooth and it makes, I think it's 5 or more treasures, then you make infinite treasures, you can make infinite mana.
A little bit more janky is if you combine it with a Sun Titan and is it Aggravated Assault?
Oh, yeah, that is pretty janky, but that's pretty awesome.
It's
But that's one of the reasons, like in the on Commander.net, one of the reasons that they said that it ended up getting banned is because it was so easy to recur and it's so much value that part of the problem is that the whole game would revolve around this stupid little 2 mana creature, and that just doesn't lead to very interesting games. So we'll talk about the CEDH implications because later in this episode, we have a section of this podcast where we'll specifically hit on CEDH stuff. I know that the CEDH crowd is concerned that banning Dockside means that Red isn't viable in CEDH anymore because there's like 2 real reasons to run Red in CEDH, and this is one of them, and now it's banned. Underworld Breach being the other one. So we'll talk about that more later in the episode, but like strictly on a casual level, I don't think there's justification for leaving this, especially like I sort of understand the scales with the power of the table argument. I kind of get that, but artifact and enchantment decks have just gotten so much extra support in the last few years that I don't know. I'm happy to see it go. What do you think, Jason? Is this one that you're also happy to see go, or are you kind of on the fence on, or do you think this is a dumb ban?
All of the things that you can do with this card because it's so cheap and it just, well, mana cost wise, let me make that clear. There's just too many ways to abuse it, and I just don't think that a card that is going to be the best card in a certain type of deck, no matter who the commander is or like how that deck is trying to do its thing, if you're making tokens and you're in red, Dockside is arguably the best card in your deck, probably. And that's boring and not very exciting. And it also, it kind of like, it takes away a little bit of creativity, because with every single deck like that you build, if you're building in red, you're like, okay, well, Dockside's going to go in there for sure. And then what probably ends up happening is you find ways to you start adding in more and more ways just to abuse Dockside, so you could just get as many treasures and get that trigger as many times as you want. And that's just not fun.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not fun to
even
play
if you
against.
fairly, like, even like the example you used of like just bringing it back with your Sun Titan, like that's like the fair use of Dockside, and that's still just a ton of extra mana and a ton of extra value. Even if you use it fairly, like I think it's just a problematic card. These last two cards, I think we should talk about together, because I think this is where you and I break off, and because on our note sheet for this episode, we specifically have a section about fast mana, and this will probably be a good transition piece. So the next two cards are Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. So Mana Crypt is from almost the beginning of the game. It's been here a long time.
You actually couldn't even get it in a pack originally.
Yeah, you had to like get it from like you like buy like a magic novel, and then in the back there was like a thing you could send to wizards, and then they'd mail you back the Mana Crypt. That's where the original Mana Crypt comes from, which is kind of a funny story. But then
Was it
there
that,
were,
or was the card actually just in the book?
no, you actually had to like buy the book, and then there was this thing in the back of the book that you have to fill out with your address and stuff, and then you would mail, because otherwise I think people would just steal the book or something. So they would like make sure that you like bought it.
I mean, think about when it came out. You know, what was the Magic economy like at the time? Like, would that have been considered a $100 card at the time?
I think so. I think it's always been a busted card.
Someone
it's banned
who
and
knows
restricted
more
in
than
other
me
formats.
about Magic economy during the
During
early
1994.
90s, let me know.
All right. So Mana Crypt is a 0 mana artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you flip a coin. If you lose the flip, it deals 3 damage to you, but more importantly, it taps for 2 colorless mana. And then the other card that is in the fast mana category is Jeweled Lotus, which is a relatively new card. It's from 2020 Commander Legends, I want to say, right?
Yep.
Zero mana artifact. You tap it, sacrifice it, add 3 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast your commander. This is the one that it's Black Lotus, but it's only for commander mana.
It's Black Lotus for not just for commander, but it's for your commander specifically.
Only one thing that you can use the mana on. So
2 if you're doing partner.
So here's where Jason and I break off in agreement, is because I think that these are also problematic cards in a lot of the same way that Dockside is. Like, Dockside is not specifically fast mana, but it's kind of fast mana. And then these are just I don't like fast mana, because what happens is we'll talk about Soul Ring. Soul Ring is part of this conversation. We'll get to that. But overall, I don't like the impact of fast mana in Commander, because what happens is, even if someone answers the thing that you ramped into, there's so many things that accrue incremental value. Like, if you can get your commander out a couple turns early, or some other big thing out a couple turns early that's drawing you cards or giving you extra mana, it's giving you extra value faster than people will have the answer to. So like, the day after this video, or the day before this video came out, the Commander Clash guys did a podcast talking about this. And the example that Tomer used was, I think it's Voja. It's the new Naya, like, wolf elf commander for murders. And like, if you Jeweled Lotus into that, well, you could just say, oh, we'll just get good and run more removal. But it has Ward. It has Ward 3. So like, even like if you get your commander on turn 2 or whatever with Jeweled Lotus, now no one can answer it. And what ends up happening is, when you have these fast mana starts, is that they just get so far ahead, and either they become arch enemy and the whole game becomes around, we have to team up on that guy, which isn't very fun, or that person just actually runs away with the game and ends up winning, and that's also not very fun. And I know that some people say that they like the fast-paced games, they like the higher power and the higher variance. And while I think that there is some value to that, especially just because you know how it goes, Jason. We've had very long Commander games before, so sometimes a quicker game is kind of nice. But when we say a quicker game, we don't mean someone curb stomps in like wins on turn 4, or if they don't win on turn 4, they at least have their stuff set up to where there's no way that they're not going to win. You know, like that's not fun. That's not fun. And you're like, oh, you shuffle up and play again. Yeah, but now, because part of the problem also is the consistency of having multiple fast mana sources in your deck. Like we all know that Soul Ring is in most decks. If you also have Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, that's more consistency in having the fast mana in early in the game, which is the problem. But so all that to say is I'm happy to see these go. I hate these cards. Jeweled Lotus specific Mana Crypt I can give a little bit of a legacy pass to, just because like it was a different time. It was before Commander existed. It was kind of grandfathered into the format. I can kind of forgive it a little bit. But Jeweled Lotus should have never been made. Specifically, a lot of the CAG and RC members who saw Jeweled Lotus before it came out, they told Wizards, please don't make this card. Like it's been on their radar. They've talked about possibly banning it for a long time. It should never have been made. But I've said my piece. We'll have a little bit more specific stuff we can dig into with the fast mana topic, but that's why I think it's good to see these two cards go. Jason, tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to say that you're wrong, because this is just you like that these cards are banned, and I can't say that you're wrong for liking that. That's the problem I have with what your reasoning is first of all, just banning these cards when they really weren't a huge problem. I mean, when I say a huge problem, I'm taking that from the perspective of just a casual Magic player. You know, I play with the guys on this channel that you see. I play with my sister and my brother-in-law and our friends that I've met through him, and I play with a couple other people sometimes, occasionally. And in all of our experience, none of us have ever vocalized any complaints about Mana Crypt or Jeweled Lotus. None of us have ever had any issues with it. With the exception of the objections from the play group with the channel. Morgan's brought it up a couple times. Preston's definitely brought it up a couple times. But for the most part, no one ever really complained about it like it was a huge problem. Personally, I don't run Mana Crypt. I don't own one. It's just not a card that I'm interested in playing. But that's another reason why I disagree with these cards being banned, is it takes away that trust for the player and the play group. You know, I don't think that it's necessarily fair that the rules committee is just going to take that choice away from players. Because I really think at the end of the day, it's all about the player experience and how everyone at the table wants to play the game and how they want to have fun and how they want everything to play out. And you just have that conversation. You gain that understanding of when you sit down at the table, I know what type of deck I have to play or what style of deck I have to play. And if that's a play group that you are wanting to play with consistently, then you're going to have to say to yourself, I know the types of decks that I want to build, and I know the kind of cards that need to go into those decks. For our play group, specifically, the one with the channel, I don't put Jeweled Lotus in any new deck that I make. You know, it goes in two decks. It goes into my Joyra deck, which I consider a CEDH deck, and then it goes into my Miracle deck because Miracle's 7 mana. And it just makes Miracle easier to get out on turn 4 or 5. And Miracle is not necessarily a card that, you know, unless you built the deck a certain way, in a more competitive way, you need to have a lot more setup in order for Miracle to actually do its thing. First of all, it's not going to be indestructible if your life's not half of what it should be, but I digress. I think that taking that choice away from the players is not the rules committee's responsibility. It's not their job to make sure that the players are being responsible and being considerate of what everyone else is trying to do and how much fun everyone else is trying to have and how they're trying to have that fun. You know, so I just don't think that the advantage that you get from these cards in casual decks is so detrimental to the gaming experience. If somebody's playing a CEDH level deck at a casual pod, that is going to damage everyone's experience except the CEDH player. But there's, I mean, 4 players with 499 card decks. Okay, so 198 plus 198, that's what, 396? I think that's the math. 396, that's 396 cards. You're telling me one card out of 396 cards is going to ruin the gaming experience, and all it does is it adds more mana to your mana pool? I would think that the cards like maybe Thassa's Oracle or Notion Thief or Narset, I think those cards, Blood Moon, those cards are going to ruin the gaming experience. The cards that enable you to get to those cards, I just don't understand the reasoning why like that is the problem. You're able to get to that stuff faster, but it's not, I just don't see it being as consistent as, the rules committee makes it seem. I don't see people playing Jeweled Lotuses, on turn 1 or turn 2 or turn 3 or turn 4 every single game, even though I know they're running them in those decks. So I don't think that these cards needed to be banned. I think that, from my experience, playgroups and the players are pretty, understanding about how each other want to play and the types of decks that they build, so they know what cards to and not to play.
So Jason made a really good point at the beginning of this episode that was, if you're in a play group that all likes these cards and you all agree that it's fine, then it's fine. It's the rule 0 thing, right? Where some people will have their house bans, or specific play groups will say hey, let's try avoiding these kind of cards, especially in these kind of situations or whatever, right? That's pretty common if you are playing with the same people all the time, and you kind of adjust to each other, and your power level. So if you guys are already playing Mana Crypts and Jeweled Lotuses, and you agree that that's a fine power level and it's balancing out because you're all doing it, that's fine. A couple problems though is that, well, one, I can tell you that there are people who think that their deck is casual and not CEDH, and they're running Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. And one of the excuses I hear is oh, well, my commander is 8 mana or it's 9 mana, so I need these cards to actually get my commander out. But a lot of the times it's different if it's an old school Kamigawa legendary and it's not even that good. Then I'd be okay, sure, I'm not going to cry that you have Jeweled Lotus in your deck. But if it's a modern, made in the last few years with commander being the focus of Wizards game design, it is 9 mana because it needs to be 9 mana because it's insanely powerful. Think New Atraxa, right? That's a 7 mana card. It's very, very powerful, and it needs to be that much mana. If you're playing it 3 turns earlier or whatever, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. So the RC has a very interesting predicament, which is that commander is inherently broken. And the only reason that it hasn't collapsed in on itself is because we, as a united front, have decided to pretend that commander is not broken. we're just rolling with it and pretending that all these problematic cards that are in the format are not that problematic. All that to say is I've heard the arguments that oh, why did this get banned and not this? I get that. And there's a lot of cards. If you look at the salt score on EDH Rec, there's a lot of cards that I'm I hate that card. I don't want to see that card. But at the same time, it's about what's in the player perception and what's being played frequently. I see Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypts way more often than I see Thassa's Oracle. And that's coming from a guy who doesn't really play CEDH. I've played a handful of CEDH games, but that's not my forte. That's not I'm talking power level 7, power level 8, so the higher end of casual. I see Mana Crypts and Jeweled Lotuses way more than I see a lot of the other, or even Notion Thieves and other cards that are just really annoying, unfun kind of cards, or Vorinclexes, Armageddons, all that kind of annoying stuff. You just don't see that very often. And here's the thing. The RC needs to keep a focus on what they think the heart of the format is. And the heart of the format is quote unquote casual. And I don't mean to say that as a filthy casual, but Commander was created for a place to play your old janky cards that don't have homes anymore because they rotated out of standard, or maybe they weren't even good in standard, maybe they're not good in other formats. Commander is the place where you can come take those big, like 7 and 8 big stupid creatures, punch face with them, and still have a good old time. That is casual. And it's fine that power creep is going to happen and that the format's going to change and evolve, and their philosophy is going to have to change and evolve with the times of game design change, especially with Wizards' focus being so much on Commander now. They have a very, very hard job, but they need to focus on making Rule Zero easier, right? Because where it falls off on saying, oh, well, if your playgroup's okay with it, then just keep playing with the cards. Or if you say, oh, well, we think these cards aren't okay, we'll just not play them. That all goes out the window the second you go to a convention, you go to your LGS, you play on Spell Table, you play on Magic Online. All of that goes out the window. So the ban list has to reflect what is being seen often to better create a understanding. So that's less things you have to talk about when you sit down to Rule Zero. Because more times than not, when you are playing Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, Docksize in your deck, it's because your deck is not casual, or it would at least like maybe it would have a hard time at a CDH table, but like actual casual decks, you're just going to curb stomp, right? And so the RC is just saying, we have to make Rule Zero easier and tackle the topics for Rule Zero that aren't always going to be hit. And that's an impossible job in a format that has a lot of really busted, ridiculous cards. They have an impossible job. And I have a lot of grace for them. So I want to lead that into our conversation, though, about the consistency thing, because the argument that people will say to try to discredit everything I just said is that Sol Ring is still unbanned. In the actual article that's on the mothership, there's a paragraph that says, we should also talk about the elephant in the room. We're not banning Sol Ring and have no desire to. Yes, based on the criteria we've talked about here, it would be banned. Sol Ring is an iconic card of the format, and it's sufficiently tied to the identity of the format, and it defies the laws of physics in a way that no other card does. Banning Sol Ring would be fundamentally changing the identity of the format. We aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. It happens every once in a while. It's still exciting. And removing the other 3 cards geometrically reduces the number of hands capable of substantial above curbs mana generation in the first few turns. So that is also fundamentally different, because we'll have a little bit of a section in a little bit talking about the financial impact of these bans, but everyone has Sol Ring. Sol Ring is $1 or $2. It's in every precon, and if they ban Sol Ring, you make all the precons that are still on the shelves illegal, and you make all of the other precons that are in production illegal. The way that you would get around that is you would say, like, they had these like standard precons a couple years ago, and they ended up banning the Faceless Haven, I want to say. It's the snow dual land that's a creature land. They ended up banning it in standard, but the way they got around it for that precon is that they just said, hey, if you just play this precon, no upgrades, you can keep those in. So like they could do something like that. Like if you just say like, play this precon, no upgrades, you could keep the Sol Ring in there. But other formats do this where they ban around other cards. And I like the idea of like, we can still sometimes have explosive starts, but we just want to reduce the number of times that happens. So it's still like, it makes it more special when it does happen. It's like, whoa, look at that. There he goes. But if that happens too often, then it's just a different game. So what do you think about banning these, but not banning Sol Ring?
So with the last thing that you said, I will agree with that. Having less explosive starts in games, it does make when that happens a lot more special, and it's a more fun experience, and it almost builds up a challenge, for the other players at the table. It's like, how am I gonna overcome that? Or like, we need to work together so that we can stop what's going on over there. But I think that banning Sol Ring would be ridiculous. It would be a complete unnecessary thing because Soul Ring is incredibly accessible. It's I got like 12. You want one? I'll mail one to you. It's just it's not going to be healthy for the format because of how many decks that it exists in, which is probably all of them. And if not, all the ones that can legally run it without any type of deck restrictions saying that you can't.
I have one deck that can't run it because of a deck. I have one deck, and Tommy has a deck that can't run it because they have companions that don't meet the right restriction. But like,
And I know there's that oh gosh, that Domri deck where you can't cast non-creature spells. That those types of decks, but the majority of decks are going to run that card, and because it's so easily accessible, it's not a problem. I think that if Jeweled Lotus was, $5, it wouldn't have been banned because everyone would have one, everyone would play it, everyone would be used to playing it, and Commander games would just be a lot faster all the time.
I would almost argue that they would have. I almost wonder if they would have banned these cards earlier if they were cheaper.
See, I just don't see that because if everyone has access to it,
that's true.
So
it's part of
the reason. Okay, so I will say I do see an argument for them being banned sooner if everyone had them, because it would actually warp the entire way that the game is played. Because every game would just be faster. Like that's just how it would be. Which the longer games can be fun. Like if it's like an arch enemy type situation and everyone at the table, works their way to build their spot back up so that, it's now an even like 4-player game instead of a 3v1, or, somebody takes out the arch enemy and then they become the arch enemy. So now the remaining 2 players have to, so like longer games can definitely lead to more interesting gameplay. I just think that with where we were at with Mana Crypt and Soul and Jeweled Lotus, I don't think that it was in as many decks where you would see that same consistency every time you sat down at a table to play. It's not something that I think is hurting the format with its consistency, which is such a strange like reasoning for banning it, because it's like I think Jeweled Lotus is in like 38% of decks. So
but it would be in a lot more if it was cheaper.
It would be in a lot more if it was cheaper, but that's where I can kind of see what you're saying about it would be banned sooner in that situation.
Because it would be more obvious how oppressive these cards are. Because I think part of the problem is that a lot of people are like, is it that bad? And the reason they say that is because they either haven't played with it much themselves, or maybe they haven't played against it much. But like the more often you see it, the more you're like, oh my God, these cards are insane. Because I know that's how I feel, like specifically about Mana Crypt. I think the Jeweled Lotus is the one card that I could say, like, in certain situations, I'm not going to be upset about it. Like, if you have a 9-mana commander from, like, 12 years ago, then, like, sure. But, like, otherwise, it's kind of ridiculous. But
something I do think that players have a pretty good grasp on in this format is not every deck needs to be built to win or win as soon as possible. And I think that Commander players, by and large, are very likely to understand that building fun, goofy, silly, janky decks is like it's something that you have to do, and it's something that you actually want to do. Once you see what happened in a game, you're like, that was some weird stuff that went down. I want to build a deck that does something like that. I have a Jalero Polymorphous deck where I have 2 non-legendary creatures that I could potentially flip into. One of them is Wonder, just because I want to give my creatures flying by putting it in the graveyard. And the other is I can't even think of the name, but it's the Leviathan that turns all lands into islands. And oh my gosh, it's really so funny. Much fun. Yeah. It's such a janky.
He's playing that on the Patreon exclusive episode of our gameplay that's hopefully coming out soon.
I don't run Jeweled Lotus in that because that's not a deck that's designed to actually do something crazy and win the game. It's just designed to be fun and janky.
So there is an argument that like these fun janky decks need really strong cards to back them up. I think like an example that I've seen before is before they house banned Ristic Study on Commander Clash. They house banned Ristic Study just because it's annoying. It adds a lot of time to the game and whatnot. But they would play it a lot. One, just because it's a good card, but it would be a good way for when they're playing these really janky themes that they could like kind of keep up with the rest of the table. So there is a little bit of an argument for that. But what do you think about the idea that the RC needs to do their bans and stuff for casual, right? Because there is an impact on CEDH and all of this. But in CEDH, the way I've had a few different conversations with people who prefer CEDH, like that's their preferred format and stuff like that. But they seem kind of split. I've kind of promoted the idea of like maybe they should just go make their own format since they like different things. They obviously want a different kind of game than the average Commander player. CEDH and actual Commander are barely the same thing. On the other hand, I think the most common thing I've heard from CEDH players is that they don't want their own format. Most of them I've heard them say like, yeah, we like playing with the restrictions of actual Commander, and we're just pushing it as far as we can. We're just foot on the gas, going as crazy as we can. We're pushing the limits of what this format is, and that's what we want. And if that's the case, then they should be okay with the RC banning based on casual because they'll just adapt. But if not, then they should go break off and start their own format with their own ban list and stuff like that, which they tried doing recently and it failed. But what do you think about that? What do you think about the CEDH implications on all of this? Because these are staples in CEDH, but casual players kind of realize like these cards are too strong.
So I think that the CEDH implications are pretty obvious. These definitely enable you to go fast, and so if you can have a pretty consistent gameplay and get these cards out so that you can start going off quicker than everybody else at the table. That to me just feels like a part of what CDH is. So I think that these cards are absolutely appropriate for that. It just like I don't understand why we feel this need to protect the casual players from the CEDH players. It's like they're like the schoolyard bully, and like casual players are like the new kid at school, and the rules committee is like that one kid, like, oh no, stay away from him. Now someone is a CEDH player right away. If they don't tell you that they play CEDH, you'll figure it out right away. And then you know what? You either just don't play a game with that one, or you just don't play a second game with that person.
Well, I think the problem is that their expectations of the game are incredibly different. I think that's the problem, because in CEDH you're trying to win as fast as possible, whereas in casual it's like, hey, I brought my deck where every card has a chair in the art or something, something like just dumb, like.
I'm curious to see how the CEDH community feels now that the cards are banned, because I feel like since these cards got banned, they might actually now push more for their own format.
I could see
where
that.
They have their own ban list, because it's like they don't feel like these cards were problems in their style of Commander. And so they want a format where they can play them, and they want to probably be able to play them in tournaments like they have been, and not have to just completely reassemble decks. It's switching out one card, but you never know how certain CEDH players feel about these types of things. I don't see why CEDH has to rule what casual can do, and I don't think that casual should dictate what CEDH can do.
Well, okay, so here's the problem: is if CEDH goes off and becomes its own format, you're fragmenting the community, because you're technically using the same card pool, and you're following all the same rules, and that leads for some bleed over, right? Like some of the cutthroat CEDH players can turn around and then be like, all right, that was fun, I'm going to cool off with the casual game. Or vice versa, the casual player might look over at a convention and see a high-power game and be like, that seems interesting, maybe I'll see what they're up to, right? And the learning curve is relatively simple because you're using the same card pool, you have the same ban list, you're following all the same rules. It's very easy to transition between. If you go off and make CDH its own format with its own ban list and all of that, it won't take long for it to start looking like a completely different format. That makes the merging between the two much more difficult, because we have these other like sort of commander variants, and they're just not as popular, and this is part of the problem.
See, I don't think that having to transition between like a CEDH has its own format and regular Commander, I don't think that that's something that, to me, that would be the same as like transitioning from Modern to Standard or Standard to Commander.
Well, no, because they have different card pools.
Commander.
No, because those have different card pools. In CEDH and Commander, at least you have your own format. Or same
CEDH,
card pool.
you would have a similar card pool. It wouldn't be the same, because obviously the whole reason for having your own format is so that you can have your own ban list, so that you can play with certain cards that you can't play with in regular Commander. So I don't think that that's too much of a transition, because people that play in other formats play Commander, and people that play Commander play other formats. Like, it's all just about knowing what the rules are and what you can and can't play in those games. I think that.
Well, so what do you think about this? Because my other concern with having CDH break off and make its own ban list is, if they do that, the same mentality for current CDH is just going to exist in the new break off timeline. So we'll have CDH 2.0, which is that you just keep playing Commander with the current rules and restrictions. You're not playing CDH, you're just playing real Commander, but now you're still just taking those restrictions and pushing it to its limits. That's what CDH is now, but now you're just going to not play actual CDH, and you're just playing CDH within the confines of actual Commander. So you're still going to have people doing that. You're still just going to have people just pushing the boundaries. That is CDH, and then it doesn't help Rule 0, which is part of the problem. So
I would disagree that doesn't help with Rule 0, but I feel like we've talked about Rule 0 enough, and I think
I hate Rule 0.
it's the players at the table's responsibility to make sure that everyone understands how they're going to play and how everyone's going to have a good time. Because at the end of the day, you should always just want everyone to have a good time when you're playing, unless you're that type of friend that you just want your other friends to be miserable, in which case,
well,
why?
Your friends just need to beat you a couple times.
Seriously, beat you up. I think that the bigger implications for this are just the financial ones.
Yes.
Because all day we can talk about how we like to play the game, how we don't like to play the game, cards we like to play against, cards we don't like to play against. That's all personal preference and opinion. And at the end of the day, we all have our own opinion. Maybe we're entitled to it, maybe we're not. Who knows? But you can't just change someone's opinion just by talking to them most of the time, especially in today's day and age. But the one thing that we can all agree on, and at least if we don't, we can gain some sort of understanding so that we can come to an agreement on it, is the financial ramifications of these bans. With the exception of Nadu, every single one of these cards costs $80 or more. And
it's a lot of money.
It's a ton of money. First of all, you have players' private collections for what they do, with their deck building. Some players only have one of each of these. Some players only have one of, any of these. Like, I only have a Jeweled Lotus. I don't have any of the other ones, except Nadu. But Nadu is like super easy to get, which is another reason why it was a problem. But some players had one of each of these. Some players had 5 of each of these because they run them in so many decks. There's so much investment from the player side that it really is infuriating that these bans happened, because it's like so much of my collection just lost so much value overnight, and I had no say in the matter whatsoever. Beyond that, game stores that had these cards in their inventory lost tons of money overnight like that. And now you start talking about, people like game stores. Like, I don't think that these cards being banned are necessarily going to put certain game stores out of business, but it's definitely going to tank your sales, and your inventory is going to pile up on cards that you can't sell because nobody can play them. And then you look even beyond that. Things that like sealed product that already exists that has these cards in it just dropped in so much value as well. There's no reason that a Commander Masters pack should be any more than like $7-8 at this point.
Well, so
Um,
I actually think that Commander Masters Commander
Commander Masters
Legends.
probably
Excuse me.
Commander Masters is probably I misspoke. Commander Legends.
Yeah, Commander Legends. I don't think is that much more than it was at launch. It's probably a little bit more, but they printed it a lot, and it was right at
$8 or $9
COVID.
on average now per
Oh,
pack.
is it? Is it? Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, that's a little bit more than I thought.
Well, I don't know how much that's dropped since Jeweled Lotus got banned, but Jeweled Lotus that's a $100 card that was in there. Like, if you can potentially pull a $100 card from a pack, they're probably going to charge you $10 for that pack.
At least there's other valuable cards in that set.
Yeah, that's true, but it's and then think about like all the rare printings of these cards. Like maybe those will still maintain some value, but now even from just a collector's perspective, if you're just collecting the cards just to have them as like pieces of memorabilia or whatever, now your collection has lost some incredible value. I don't think that even if they considered the financial ramifications, I don't think that they quite took into consideration like how like the scale, the depth, the weight of these decisions on the finances of the people involved in this game.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. I agree with basically everything you said. It should go really without saying that if you actually quote unquote lost money, because I don't think losing money is the right way to do this, because you're playing a card game where cards could theoretically get banned, where these are, cards that cost Wizards cents to make. The idea that we agree to spend this kind of money on card stock is kind of ridiculous. All that to say, I am empathetic to that situation. Not for what it's worth, 60 card players, we know what that's like, right? I think part of why this hits so bad, because for example, this happens all the time in Modern and stuff, right? Before Nadu got banned, it was $20. Before it was banned in Modern, it was $20. And people built Nadu decks anyways because they're like, this is the best deck in the format. I want to play the best deck in the format. I know Nadu's probably going to get banned, or even like the One Ring right now. One Ring is about $100 a piece. A lot of Modern decks are playing 4 copies of it. And Modern players are like, look, I know the One Ring might get banned. I'm going to do it anyways. They have that understanding of what they're getting themselves into, because that's the world we live in. And in 60 card formats, they do a better job at regulating the formats. Whereas I think part of the problem is that the RC goes so long without making changes. I think what they could have done really to make this less of a feel bad is ban 1 or 2 of the cards like a year ago. Like they should have banned Jeweled Lotus preemptively, like they said they might. They should have banned Dockside a long time ago, like they said they were going to, and just slowly worked their way up to this, because then they could say like, hey, these cards are on our format. Hey, these are the kind of cards we don't think are healthy for casual play, stuff like that. And it would have lessened the blow, done more of this change over a longer period of time, right? It would have eased people into it. And then that activity of, hey, sometimes we do ban things, will make people more aware of it and be like, all right, yeah, this card's expensive. Yeah, it might get banned, but I feel comfortable with that because I want to play with it, right? People would be more comfortable with that. So I think that's an RC problem. Like they should just, if they want to do big changes, I'm all for that. I think more bans is better in most situations, just because it means that they care. It means that they're trying. It means that they're trying to create a fun, healthy play environment. So I'm all for it, but they need to actively be doing stuff. And we went 3 years without a ban. So that's problem number 1. Also, there were a bunch of rumors that there was insider trading with the RC, like they sold all their copies, banned it, crashed the market. By the way, there's no proof that happened. There were some screenshots of graphs from CCG Player that suggested that might have happened. But if you actually like read all of the data, it's just that the graphs don't look right. but the data suggests that that wasn't happening. So don't believe that. There wasn't any insider trader going. And like some of the RC has even come out and been like, hey, here's all my mana crypts and my Lotuses. I still have them. I didn't sell them. So like that wasn't happening. They weren't like trying to screw us all over.
I don't think there was any type of conspiracy going on
wasn't,
there either. So, I don't think that.
Yeah. So I think the important thing is just to remember that this is a card game where different formats are going to have their own ban lists. And it's important to remember that if you're going to spend money on very powerful cards, especially cards that all of these are cards that the RC has said these are problematic and we're keeping an eye on them. So if you have been paying attention, you will know that for the last few years, these are all cards that were on the cutting room floor. These were cards that could possibly get cut. So I think I don't say that to diminish your financial burden, like if you are specifically in MTG finance, but that's like bad. Like if you're gonna do that, just get into stocks, man. That's it's way better. Just get into that. Like don't do Magic finance. All right, it's way more volatile. So what do you think about pricing for banning though? Because in no other format do we give a crap. In other formats we say this card is not fun, or it's a bad play pattern, or it's too strong, something like that, and we just ban it. So I know that a lot of these are expensive cards, but realistically, if they want to create the most fun and healthy format possible, they can't possibly be worried about the price of cards, right? They just have to say these cards are too strong or not fun, and we have to just let them go, right?
These cards are expensive, yes, but they're expensive because players are willing to spend that much money on them, and game stores are able to sell them for that much. So at the end of the day, you got to look at it and be like, well, people are comfortable paying these prices for these cards, so it's not something that we need to keep in mind. So I don't think that price has to go with it at all, but it should be noted that how is this going to affect game stores across everywhere? What is this going to do to those markets that I don't think that it's going to be that big. But I think that this is going to be one of the bigger bans where it could cause problems for certain markets. So price isn't something that should be considered, but I do think that the financial side of it can't be ignored. Like the price of the individual card, I don't think matters as much, but it's the grand scheme of that. That's why you need to consider those parts of that.
Yeah, the vendors specifically is an interesting part of it because I think they are somewhat protected just in the fact that they only will keep so much in their inventory because they know how many are in demand in their area and stuff like that. So I think that it hopefully, I can't really say for sure, but hopefully it's not going to be as bad as it theoretically could be, right? But that is an interesting piece of it that I don't see a lot of people talking about. I know Rachel Weeks has tweeted about that a couple times, but outside of that, I don't really see people talking about it much. So that is an interesting part to keep in mind. But all that to say is don't invest in Magic for the sake of investing in Magic. Like do it because it's cards you actually want to play with the understanding that some of these cards are just very strong and might get banned. So
I hate that one of the things that I want to make sure that we at least touch on is the fact that Jeweled Lotus and Dockside were made for Commander. Dockside, I don't really care about talking about Dockside because I get it. I don't think that it's a problem that it got banned. Jeweled Lotus specifically says Commander on it. You can't play it anywhere else. It's not legal in any other format. I guess you could play it in Vintage, right?
There's a legacy deck that they use, I believe it's a doubling cube, because what you can do is you can this is a real deck. I'm not just brain crafting. This is like a tier 2 to tier 3 deck. So it's not like one of the best decks in the format, but it's a real deck that people play. Is you play like Jeweled Lotus and all the fast mana cards, and then you use the cube to filter the mana. So now you can still use that mana, so you get all this mana for free because it was a 0 mana artifact. So it's kind of funny. But there are actually like real world paper implications where you can still play these cards.
Outside of that,
it's very niche, but it's a thing.
This card was made for Commander.
Yeah.
So the fact that like you banned it from the only format that it can go in, which isn't gonna hurt the player base of Magic the Gathering as a whole game. It's only gonna hurt the Commander's players. But it just feels silly that it's a card that really is only viable in Commander that you're banning.
Well, so I think it's worth noting that there are other formats that have command zones, and they're, especially because of people's reactions to this, I'd believe that there are new formats that come out that are basically the same thing, just slightly different. So I would believe that there's a chance that some of these cards still are playable somewhere, even though that they're not really playable in Commander. So I do think it's interesting that these are Commander design cards. Also, Dockside. If Dockside was 4 mana, I wouldn't. There's a version of Dockside that there's a version of Dockside that would exist that wouldn't be as bad. And then Nadu also is kind of in this camp because they realized that Nadu was not going to be good. So they're like, oh, let's make it for Commander players now, make it some changes to it. So in some ways, Nadu is part of this conversation too.
There's really some like easy ways to fix Nadu, I think.
Yeah. Well, honestly, the original version of Nadu would have been fine. I don't know if you saw
fine. Would have been fine.
So the other part that I think is interesting is this should be a warning to Wizards, because this is why I've heard people say that like Wizards should take over the ban list because the RC doesn't know what they're doing, which I think is moronic. But then you would have a conflict of interest, right? Because Wizards would never ban Jeweled Lotus, even though like whether or not you think it's problematic, it's an incredibly pushed card, right? If they want to sell more packs of Commander, whatever the next Commander set is, they will put Jeweled Lotus in, charge twice the price for those packs, and make you go buy it, right? They are artificially inflating these prices, right? It is in Wizards' best interest to not ban or to ban certain things. They are not thinking of the players at all. Well, I mean, sort of. In order to make money, they have to make sure that the game's fun. So there's a little bit of a balance there. But in general, having someone who's separated from Wizards who's running the ban list for Commander is actually like beneficial. But
you need that third party perspective in order to keep the ban list like fair.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. So I definitely hope that no kind of action like that is ever taken. Then it really becomes the Star Wars meme where it's Padme and she's like, so this is how Liberty dies under thunderous applause. Like when Jar Jar hands over power over to Chancellor Palpatine, and he just goes, "And we're gonna start the first galactic empire." It's that. It is what people are wanting. It's a terrible idea. Okay. I could also get political about this because there's real world implications of this too, and it just infuriates me that people can think like this. You need the outside source. But the reason I think it should be a warning to Wizards is because they have really focused in on designing specifically for Commander. And that's fine because that's their most popular format for the last couple of years. For the next few years, it probably will still be the most popular format. Who knows? I don't know. Some of the reactions kind of ridiculous. But it makes sense that they would want to target at that and try to feed that, try to make a little bit more money off of that. That makes sense to me. But this is proof that it can go too far. And this happened with Lutri too, right? Like they preemptively banned Lutri before Lutri came out. And when Jeweled Lotus was about to come out, people who saw it early were like, please don't actually make that. That's a terrible card. Please don't make that card. And this is all proof that you can take the design for Commander thing too far, which is good. That hopefully is a warning to Wizards to tone it down with the power level of Commander. And hopefully it's a warning shot that also says that if you keep up with this, we will keep up with this. All right. So it's kind of a little bit of a check, keep each other balanced. So
I do think I think that that's a fair assessment, and I do think that I like that perspective. I didn't really think of it like that, but the rules committee using that as a way to tell Wizards, like, hey, let's keep it casual around here. We don't need it to be super broken all the time. Not only does that promote more fun and interactive games, but it also makes Commander a bit more accessible, because the less of these $100 cards that you print, the less money people are going to actually have to spend on building a deck, because they can buy cheaper cards. So I do think that that's an interesting perspective, and I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, we have made it through our note sheet, and we honestly could talk about this forever. There's other drama pieces of it. There's other nuanced perspectives of it that we could definitely get into. Like, we've been, we're recording this on Friday, so 4-5 days after the ban happened. You guys are seeing this just over a week after the ban happened. So, we've had plenty of time to think about a lot of different things. So we could keep talking, but did you have any final thoughts or anything we haven't really got to hit on yet today?
The only other thing that I wanted to say was this was something funny that happened when we were talking about this when the ban was announced. Preston tried to talk us into letting him keep playing Dockside in one of his decks, and we were like,
"No way, man!"
I was "No, it's banned. What do you mean? You can't play that card anymore." And I just thought that was funny, because he was totally he's all in on ban Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. He was like, yes, this is good for the format. I'm happy it happened. So it was just funny when we were talking about it. He was like, yeah, I'm glad that they banned Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, but I can keep playing Dockside, right?
Oh, yeah, whatever, man.
Like, no, you can't.
Yeah, he actually. So Preston is normally on our podcast. If you're a longtime viewer of the show, he sat this episode out because he is infuriated by some of the online discourse. So he just didn't even want to involve himself in that, and that's really sad.
So I'll go back to what I said earlier in the episode. Stop being mean to people online.
Yeah, it's just so unnecessary. Like, what is there to gain from that? It's just sad. Like, be nice to people. It's okay to disagree on things. That's the human condition, man, is that we're different. We come from different backgrounds. We have different life experience. We're just seeing things differently, and that's fine. And so in a lot of ways, that's good. But
I don't know if anyone on the rules committee is going to see this or not, but even though I disagree with your decision, I love you, rules committee.
Yeah, you guys have an impossible job. You really do.
You can't please everybody.
Yeah, you can't.
You can't please everybody.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thanks for having this conversation with me. Hope that the viewers got a little bit out of this. Hope that they've got something useful out of seeing two people who don't necessarily agree with everything that happened on Monday kind of bounce some ideas off of each other. So we will be back next week for hopefully a more lighthearted Yeah, next episode is like a polar 180. Next episode is going to be real funny. So tune in next week for a much, much more lighthearted episode. Make sure you subscribe to all that good YouTube algorithm stuff. Check out some of our other videos in the meantime while you're waiting for that to come out. And we will see you guys later. Bye.